Life often feels like an endless struggle for control, chasing success, approval, and certainty. But what if the key to a fulfilling life isn't in caring more, but in caring less? Michel de Montaigne, the great French philosopher of the Renaissance, believed that true wisdom comes from letting go of unnecessary worries and embracing the natural flow of life. In this video, we'll explore Montaigne's philosophy and discover how adopting his mindset can bring clarity, peace, and unexpected success. Michel de Montaigne's wisdom was rooted in a profound skepticism about human nature and the world around him. He observed that much of our suffering comes from the pressure to conform to societal expectations, chase after fleeting desires, or live according to rigid ideas of success. One of his most important insights was that true freedom and peace come from letting go of control, of our assumptions about how life should unfold, and of the constant need to prove ourselves. Montaigne's approach to life was deeply personal and reflective. He famously said, "I am myself the subject of my book." His essays were an exploration of his own mind, examining everything from the nature of death to the best way to live. He didn't seek absolute answers, but instead embraced the complexity and contradictions of life. This openness to uncertainty is one of the core aspects of his philosophy, and it's something that can radically shift the way we approach our own lives. At the heart of Montaigne's thinking is the idea that we cannot control everything. In fact, the more we try to control, the more we are likely to feel frustrated and dissatisfied. He often reflected on the futility of striving for perfection or trying to force outcomes. Instead of clinging to rigid plans or expectations, Montaigne suggested that we should learn to accept life as it comes, embracing its unpredictability and impermanence. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or giving up on our goals. Rather, it means cultivating a sense of detachment from outcomes. We can still work toward our aspirations, but we should not let our happiness be dependent on the results. Montaigne's philosophy suggests that when we stop worrying about the future and trying to force things into place, we open ourselves to the natural flow of life. One of Montaigne's key ideas was that we should focus on living authentically rather than trying to live up to external standards. He believed that the pressure to conform and meet societal expectations often leads to anxiety and inner conflict. Instead, he encouraged people to be true to themselves, to recognize their own limitations, and to accept their human nature with compassion and humor. In this way, letting go of societal pressure allows us to live more freely and to find happiness in who we truly are, not in who we think we should be. By releasing our attachment to outcomes and embracing life's uncertainties, we begin to see the beauty in the present moment. Montaigne often spoke about the importance of not dwelling too much on the past or obsessing over the future. Life is constantly changing, and by letting go of the need to control it, we can fully experience the here and now. This acceptance of life as it is, imperfect, unpredictable, and sometimes chaotic, is what allows us to live with greater ease. Montaigne didn't just write about these ideas, he lived them. He was constantly experimenting with his thoughts and experiences, testing his own limits and questioning his assumptions. His personal essays are a testament to this ongoing exploration, a reflection of his belief that life's greatest truths aren't found in dogma or certainty, but in the act of questioning and being open to whatever life presents. Ultimately, Montaigne's philosophy teaches us that the more we care about controlling and perfecting everything, the more we suffer. True wisdom, he believed, lies in accepting the unknown, surrendering our need for control, and learning to live with a sense of ease and openness. By adopting this mindset, we can free ourselves from the constant tension and anxiety that comes with trying to shape the world to our will. Instead, we begin to understand that life is not something to be conquered, but something to be experienced and appreciated in its raw, unpredictable beauty. Montaigne's philosophy encourages us to embrace our imperfections, viewing them not as flaws, but as essential aspects of our human nature. He believed that self-acceptance was not a passive resignation, but a deep recognition that our imperfections are what make us uniquely ourselves. In a world that often demands perfection, whether it's in our appearances, our careers, or our personal lives, Montaigne's wisdom offers a refreshing and liberating perspective. True peace comes from accepting our shortcomings and understanding that we don't need to be flawless to lead a meaningful life. Montaigne's own life was full of contradictions, mistakes, and uncertainties. He didn't see himself as a philosopher in the traditional sense, but rather as someone who was constantly reflecting on his own thoughts, actions, and experiences. His personal essays are filled with admissions of vulnerability and imperfection. He wasn't afraid to reveal his flaws, whether they were physical, emotional, or intellectual. In fact, he often used these imperfections to connect with others. By acknowledging his humanity, his insecurities, fears, and uncertainties, Montaigne created a space for others to do the same. In many ways, Montaigne's philosophy is an antidote to the pressure to be perfect. In a society where success is often measured by external achievements or by conforming to societal norms, Montaigne reminds us that the pursuit of perfection is a futile endeavor. No matter how much we strive for flawlessness, we will always fall short. Perfection, as Montaigne saw it, is a mirage, a distant ideal that pulls us away from the richness of our lived experience. The quest for perfection can lead to anxiety, frustration, and dissatisfaction. When we focus too much on what we lack or on how we fall short of an ideal, we miss the beauty of who we are in the present moment. Montaigne believed that by accepting our imperfections, we could let go of the constant self-criticism that so often holds us back. In doing so, we become freer to live authentically, to make mistakes without judgment, and to grow through our experiences. Self-acceptance, according to Montaigne, is not about settling for mediocrity or giving up on personal growth. Rather, it's about embracing our humanity. It's about understanding that to be human is to be imperfect, and that imperfection is part of the natural course of life. He didn't see his flaws as weaknesses to be ashamed of, but as elements that made him a more complete person. In fact, Montaigne's willingness to confront his own imperfections with honesty and humor was one of the hallmarks of his writing. He was able to laugh at himself, to see his mistakes as part of the tapestry of his life, and to learn from them without harsh judgment. Montaigne also believed that our imperfections are often what make us relatable to others. When we put on a facade of perfection, we distance ourselves from those around us. But when we embrace our flaws, we create authentic connections. Others are more likely to relate to us when we show them that we are not perfect, that we are vulnerable and human just like them. It's through this shared humanity that we can find common ground and build meaningful relationships. This approach to self-acceptance is particularly important in a world that often demands we present a polished, idealized version of ourselves. Social media, for example, has made it easier than ever to curate our lives, showing only the best and most successful parts. But this curated image of perfection is often far from the reality of our lived experiences. Montaigne's philosophy offers a stark contrast to this trend. He invites us to be honest about our imperfections, to resist the pressure to conform to unrealistic standards, and to find peace in the truth of who we are. In addition, Montaigne's thoughts on self-acceptance encourage us to be kinder to ourselves. We are often our own harshest critics, constantly berating ourselves for mistakes or perceived flaws. But Montaigne's perspective teaches us that this self-criticism is counterproductive. Instead of focusing on our deficiencies, we can cultivate self-compassion and treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a friend. This doesn't mean avoiding growth or striving for improvement, but rather recognizing that growth comes from a place of acceptance, not from a place of judgment. To truly embrace our imperfections, we must also learn to let go of comparison. Montaigne frequently emphasized that comparing ourselves to others is one of the most damaging habits we can cultivate. When we compare our lives to the idealized images we see in the media or in our social circles, we inevitably feel inadequate. But when we stop comparing ourselves to others, we can appreciate our own unique journey. Montaigne's life wasn't perfect. He had his own struggles, doubts, and challenges, but he never compared himself to others. Instead, he focused on understanding himself and cultivating his own sense of meaning and purpose. This doesn't mean that Montaigne dismissed the value of self-improvement. He believed in the power of introspection and reflection, always seeking to understand his own mind and motivations. But self-improvement, for Montaigne, was rooted in self-acceptance, not self-rejection. He believed that when we acknowledge our imperfections, we create the space for growth to happen organically, without the pressure to be perfect or the fear of failure. In essence, Montaigne's philosophy on imperfection teaches us to embrace who we are in all our complexity. Our flaws are not obstacles to our happiness, but essential parts of the human experience. By accepting and loving ourselves as we are, we can let go of the shame and self-doubt that often hold us back. In this acceptance, we find true freedom, the freedom to be ourselves, to learn from our mistakes, and to live authentically in a world that often demands conformity. Montaigne's insight is a timeless reminder that our imperfections are not something to hide or fix, but something to embrace and celebrate. Montaigne believed that overthinking is one of the greatest obstacles to a peaceful and meaningful life. His philosophy encourages us to avoid getting trapped in a cycle of excessive worry and analysis, which often leads to paralysis and a diminished sense of well-being. We live in a world where overthinking is rampant. We constantly analyze our decisions, second-guess our actions, and imagine worst-case scenarios. While it's important to reflect on our choices, Montaigne's insight was that too much rumination distorts our perception of reality and prevents us from living fully in the present moment. Montaigne's skepticism toward overthinking stemmed from his recognition that human nature is inherently complex and unpredictable. Our minds have a tendency to create problems that aren't really there, spiraling into imaginary scenarios and potential pitfalls. He saw this constant mental chatter as a way of avoiding the raw experience of life. Instead of engaging with the present, overthinking forces us into a state of perpetual anticipation or regret, neither of which contribute to a fulfilling life. One of the core reasons why overthinking is so detrimental is that it often leads us to misinterpret situations. When we get caught in our thoughts, we focus on the negative possibilities, fixating on worst-case outcomes rather than accepting the reality of the situation as it is. Montaigne understood that human beings are prone to this kind of mental distortion. We have a tendency to catastrophize, imagining dangers and obstacles where none exist. This tendency prevents us from acting decisively and can lead to unnecessary stress. Montaigne would have argued that this mental activity is not only unproductive, but also unnecessary. The mind, when left unchecked, has the power to create chaos where there should be none. In his essays, Montaigne frequently explored the idea that life is far more unpredictable and uncertain than we'd like to believe. He rejected the illusion of control, advocating instead for an acceptance of life's uncertainties. Overthinking is often a response to our desire to control the future, to anticipate every possible outcome and prepare for every potential obstacle. Yet the more we try to control life, the more we realize how little we truly can control. Montaigne suggested that instead of trying to predict and control, we should learn to accept the present moment and trust ourselves to navigate whatever comes our way. For Montaigne, life was an unpredictable journey, and overthinking only served to create unnecessary distress. He advised us to stop trying to plan for every possible eventuality and instead trust that we can handle what life presents. This doesn't mean we should abandon prudence or responsibility. Rather, it means we should recognize that we cannot foresee or control everything. Trying to predict every possibility only serves to paralyze us with indecision. When we let go of the need to overanalyze every decision, we open ourselves to spontaneous action, creativity, and true engagement with life as it unfolds. Montaigne's own life was an example of this philosophy in practice. As a man of action, he didn't simply sit in contemplation, but took risks, traveled, and lived fully. He encountered many challenges and setbacks, but instead of overthinking them, He accepted them as part of the human condition. His approach to life was rooted in experience, not in theoretical analysis. He trusted himself to respond to situations as they arose, without being paralyzed by overthinking. This attitude gave him the courage to live authentically, to take risks, and to find meaning in the unpredictable nature of life. Overthinking also tends to be a source of anxiety, as our minds often amplify our fears and uncertainties. Montaigne believed that fear and anxiety were natural human emotions, but they shouldn't control our lives. When we overthink, we amplify our fears, imagining scenarios that are far worse than reality. This mental amplification only serves to heighten our stress and prevent us from making clear-headed decisions. By recognizing the futility of excessive worry, we can learn to quiet our minds and approach challenges with a calmer, more rational perspective. One of Montaigne's key strategies for overcoming overthinking was the practice of living with curiosity and acceptance. Instead of dwelling on possible problems or stressing over the unknown, he encouraged an open-minded approach to life. Curiosity, in Montaigne's view, is an antidote to overthinking. When we engage with the world around us with curiosity, we free ourselves from the grip of anxiety. Curiosity allows us to approach each experience with an open heart and mind, without the need to predict or control the outcome. By embracing the unknown, we can experience life more fully and respond to challenges with a sense of wonder rather than fear. Another critical aspect of Montaigne's approach was his emphasis on the importance of action. He believed that overthinking often stems from a fear of making mistakes, which prevents us from taking meaningful action. Inaction, however, only compounds our worries, leading to greater feelings of doubt and uncertainty. By focusing on action, whether it's small or large, we take control of the present moment and stop letting our minds dictate our lives. Montaigne himself was a man of action, and he encouraged us to engage with the world, to act despite our uncertainties, and to learn through experience rather than endless rumination. Furthermore, Montaigne acknowledged that overthinking is often a reaction to an overstressed, overburdened mind. In a world that moves at a fast pace, it's easy to become overwhelmed with the constant influx of information, demands, and expectations. Our minds can only handle so much before they begin to spiral into overanalysis. Montaigne suggested that in such moments, we must pause and allow ourselves time to rest and recover. He believed that quiet reflection and rest were essential for clear thinking and sound decision-making. By giving ourselves the space to clear our minds, we allow ourselves to return to life with a fresh perspective, free from the clutter of overthinking. Montaigne's thoughts on overthinking are a timeless reminder of the importance of simplicity in our mental lives. When we let go of the need to overanalyze every situation, we free ourselves from unnecessary stress and gain the ability to act with clarity and confidence. Overthinking clouds our judgment, distorts our reality, and prevents us from enjoying the present moment. By embracing Montaigne's approach of curiosity, acceptance, and action, we can learn to live more fully and peacefully, without being paralyzed by the endless cycle of worry and overanalysis. Montaigne's philosophy encourages us to move beyond the surface level of our thoughts and desires, and to engage deeply with the core of our being. One of the central ideas in his writings is that peace and contentment come not from the pursuit of external validation or material success, but from understanding and accepting our inner selves. In a world that constantly bombards us with messages of success, achievement, and comparison, Montaigne's wisdom offers a refreshing and profound alternative. True happiness can only be found when we stop chasing after fleeting external rewards and begin to cultivate a deep sense of self-acceptance and inner peace. Montaigne understood that much of the turmoil we experience in life comes from our attachment to external outcomes and the constant pressure to meet societal expectations. In his time, as in ours, people were often judged by the roles they played, by their social status, their wealth, and their accomplishments. The obsession with external validation was deeply ingrained, and it created an atmosphere of competition, comparison, and anxiety. Montaigne, however, rejected this framework. He believed that true happiness comes from within, not from how others perceive us or how we measure up against others. At the heart of Montaigne's philosophy is the notion that we are most at peace when we live authentically, when we accept ourselves as we are, without the need to perform or conform. He often wrote about the folly of trying to live up to others' expectations. The world may value certain traits, such as wealth, fame, or achievement, but Montaigne urged us to recognize that these things are fleeting and often hollow. They may provide temporary satisfaction, but they do not bring lasting fulfillment. In his essays, he spoke candidly about how his own life was shaped by the desire to meet the expectations of society, but he came to see that this was a path that led to emptiness. Instead of seeking external recognition, Montaigne encouraged us to shift our focus inward, to examine our own thoughts, desires, and motivations. He believed that when we stop looking to others for validation, we free ourselves from the anxiety and pressure that come with living for approval. By cultivating a deep understanding of our inner selves, we can achieve a sense of peace that is independent of external circumstances. This inner peace is not about escaping from the world or retreating from life's challenges, but about developing a stable foundation of self-knowledge and self-acceptance from which we can approach the world with confidence and clarity. Montaigne also understood that part of the challenge of living authentically is the difficulty we have in accepting our own imperfections. We are often our own harshest critics, constantly measuring ourselves against idealized standards of success, beauty, or intelligence. Montaigne, however, argued that accepting our flaws and limitations is an essential part of the human experience. It is through our imperfections that we come to know ourselves and others in a deeper way. Rather than seeing our flaws as obstacles, Montaigne saw them as opportunities for growth and understanding. By embracing our imperfections and acknowledging them without shame, we open the door to a more honest and fulfilling life. Living authentically also means confronting our fears, doubts, and anxieties. It's easy to become consumed by the fear of failure, the fear of not measuring up, or the fear of judgment from others. These fears can paralyze us, preventing us from taking risks or fully engaging with life. Montaigne was no stranger to these fears himself. He often wrote about his own insecurities and the difficulties he faced in trying to live authentically. However, he argued that the key to overcoming these fears is not to run from them, but to face them directly. By acknowledging our fears and learning to live with them, we reduce their power over us. Montaigne believed that we should not seek to escape the uncertainties of life, but to embrace them, understanding that they are a natural part of the human condition. The pursuit of external validation and the fear of failure often come hand in hand. When we live for the approval of others, we put ourselves in a position where our worth is dependent on external factors. Montaigne warned against this, recognizing that this constant striving for approval can lead to a life of anxiety, frustration, and disillusionment. Instead, he encouraged us to shift our perspective and to focus on living for ourselves. Living authentically means that we no longer need to measure our worth by how others perceive us or by how much we achieve in the eyes of society. Instead, we measure our worth by how true we are to ourselves and our values. An important part of living authentically, according to Montaigne, is learning to accept the passage of time and the inevitability of change. He often wrote about the impermanence of life and the futility of clinging to the past or fearing the future. This acceptance of time and change is central to his philosophy of living authentically. Montaigne believed that by letting go of our attachment to past successes or failures, and by releasing our anxieties about the future, we can truly live in the present moment. This is where peace can be found, not in the distant future or in the idealized past, but in the simple act of being present with ourselves and with the world around us. Montaigne's approach to authenticity was also deeply connected to his view of relationships. He believed that living authentically means being truthful with others, without the need for pretense or artifice. In his personal life, Montaigne was known for his close friendships and his ability to connect with others on a deep, meaningful level. He valued honesty and openness in his relationships, recognizing that these qualities foster genuine connection and mutual understanding. Rather than seeking to impress or manipulate others, Montaigne believed that we should simply be ourselves, trusting that authenticity would attract the right people into our lives. Living authentically also requires a sense of courage. It takes courage to be honest with ourselves and to confront the aspects of our lives that we may be avoiding. It takes courage to let go of the need for approval and to trust that our worth does not depend on the opinions of others. Montaigne's own courage was evident in his writings, which were deeply personal and often vulnerable. He was willing to expose his own doubts, fears, and contradictions, knowing that this would allow him to connect with others in a meaningful way. His courage in writing about his life and his reflections on the human condition has made his work timeless and resonant for generations of readers. Finally, living authentically is about finding meaning in the ordinary moments of life. Montaigne didn't believe that happiness or fulfillment came from grand achievements or extraordinary events. Instead, he argued that true contentment comes from the simple, everyday experiences of life, moments of quiet reflection, time spent with loved ones, and the joy of living in accordance with one's true nature. By letting go of the need to chase after external success, we are free to find meaning in the present, to appreciate the small, simple joys that make life beautiful. In essence, Montaigne's philosophy teaches us that happiness and peace come from living authentically, from accepting ourselves as we are, and from letting go of the need to conform to external expectations. When we stop chasing after validation and instead focus on cultivating inner peace, we unlock the potential for a life that is rich with meaning and fulfillment. By embracing who we truly are and letting go of the need for approval, we can live more freely, authentically, and joyfully. Montaigne's wisdom offers a profound invitation to stop living for others and to begin living for ourselves, to find contentment not in the pursuit of external success, but in the deep, quiet acceptance of who we truly are. Montaigne's philosophy is deeply rooted in the belief that our perception of life is the most important factor in how we experience it. At its core, his work emphasizes the idea that we are often prisoners of our own expectations, beliefs, and societal pressures. Montaigne's writings suggest that the key to living a meaningful and peaceful life lies in a radical shift in how we engage with the world, how we perceive ourselves, and how we align our actions with our true nature. One of the most powerful aspects of Montaigne's thought is his insistence on the necessity of accepting and embracing life as it is, rather than how we think it should be. He understood that much of human suffering arises from the gap between our desires and the reality we experience. We constantly set goals, chase after ideals, and envision a life of perfection, yet reality rarely measures up to our expectations. This dissonance creates stress, disappointment, and a constant sense of striving, which ultimately detracts from our happiness. For Montaigne, the pursuit of perfection is not only futile, but also counterproductive. It is through acceptance of life's imperfections and unpredictability that we find freedom. Montaigne was keenly aware of the tension that exists between human desires and the reality of existence. We are constantly in pursuit of something, whether it's wealth, status, love, or even a sense of self-fulfillment. This chase can feel exhausting and often leaves us feeling dissatisfied. But Montaigne's insight was that the more we chase after these external markers of success, the further we move from the contentment that comes from simply being. He argued that striving for an idealized version of life, one where everything is perfect, is a source of unnecessary suffering. The human desire for more, whether it's more happiness, more success, more recognition, only exacerbates the feeling of discontentment. For Montaigne, true peace comes not from the fulfillment of these desires, but from the acceptance of the life we have. This acceptance does not mean resignation or passivity, but rather an understanding that life will never fully match our expectations. When we stop trying to force life into a mold of our own making, we create space for contentment to emerge. Montaigne observed that when we accept life in all its unpredictability and imperfection, we begin to experience it in a way that feels more authentic and fulfilling. This philosophy of acceptance is not about settling for mediocrity or abandoning our goals, but rather about relinquishing our attachment to outcomes that are beyond our control. The truth, Montaigne believed, lies in accepting that we are limited beings living in an imperfect world. He recognized that human beings are flawed, and that flaw is not something to be ashamed of. In fact, it is in acknowledging our imperfections that we unlock the possibility for personal growth and authenticity. When we embrace our limitations and stop pretending to be something we are not, we can develop a more genuine sense of self-worth. This acceptance of limitation also extends to our relationships with others. Montaigne wrote about the importance of accepting the imperfections of those around us, recognizing that everyone, just like ourselves, is a work in progress. When we stop expecting perfection from others, we allow for deeper, more authentic connections to form. In his essays, Montaigne often spoke of the need to step away from rigid societal norms and embrace a more natural, spontaneous approach to life. He saw societal expectations as one of the major sources of discontent, as they often conflict with our true nature. The pressure to conform to these external standards is a significant cause of anxiety and stress. Montaigne advocated for an individualistic approach to life, one that prioritizes the inner self over the external judgments of society. This does not mean rejecting society altogether, but rather recognizing that our value does not depend on our ability to meet its standards. By letting go of the need for approval from the outside world, we free ourselves to live more authentically. A major aspect of this idea of acceptance is understanding and confronting the inevitability of death. Montaigne was deeply influenced by the Stoic philosophers, who encouraged a contemplative acceptance of death. He argued that by acknowledging the inevitability of our mortality, we are better able to live in the present moment. Death, in Montaigne's view, was not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be accepted as an integral part of life. By contemplating death, we develop a deeper appreciation for life and a greater sense of urgency to live it fully. This idea of accepting death is not about living in constant fear or despair, but about letting go of the attachment to the illusion of immortality. Once we stop living as though we have infinite time, we are able to engage more fully with the present, making the most of the time we do have. Montaigne's acceptance of life's unpredictability was also reflected in his views on decision-making. In a world that encourages certainty and control, Montaigne's philosophy promotes a more fluid and adaptable approach to life. He rejected the notion that we can plan every aspect of our lives with precision. Instead, he embraced the idea that we cannot predict the future, and that part of living well is learning to navigate uncertainty with grace and resilience. He wrote extensively about how his own life was shaped by decisions that were, at times, made in the face of uncertainty. For Montaigne, the act of living was a constant negotiation with the unknown. Rather than trying to eliminate uncertainty, he argued that we should learn to live with it, recognizing that it is an inherent part of the human experience. One of the key insights Montaigne offers is the importance of cultivating a flexible mindset. Instead of rigidly adhering to preconceived notions and expectations, we are better off adopting an attitude of openness and curiosity. Life's unpredictability often leads to unexpected opportunities, and when we are attached to specific outcomes, we may miss these opportunities entirely. Montaigne believed that the most fulfilling lives are those that embrace life's uncertainties and respond to them with adaptability. By remaining open to the unexpected, we allow life to surprise us in ways that we would never have imagined if we had rigidly stuck to a preordained plan. Montaigne's concept of acceptance also aligns with his understanding of personal growth. Growth, in his view, does not come from achieving a certain level of success or meeting external expectations. Instead, it comes from an ongoing process of self-reflection, self-acceptance, and learning from life's experiences. He encouraged people to embrace the messiness of life, the moments of failure, confusion, and hardship, as valuable opportunities for growth. Rather than seeing setbacks as failures, Montaigne saw them as essential parts of the human journey. He believed that personal growth happens when we stop striving for perfection and instead focus on becoming more attuned to our own experiences and emotions. This idea of accepting life's imperfections can also be seen in Montaigne's approach to happiness. Rather than equating happiness with the achievement of external goals or the acquisition of material wealth, Montaigne viewed happiness as a state of inner peace and contentment that comes from accepting life as it is. For him, happiness was not something that could be pursued directly, but something that arises naturally when we stop resisting the way things are. By letting go of our attachment to external success and perfection, we create space for contentment to emerge. Montaigne believed that happiness is not a destination, but a way of being, an acceptance of the ebb and flow of life, without clinging to any particular outcome. In conclusion, Montaigne's philosophy teaches us that much of our suffering comes from our attachment to ideals and expectations that are beyond our control. By accepting life's imperfections, we free ourselves from the constant striving and anxiety that come with trying to shape life into something it is not. This acceptance does not mean passivity or resignation, but rather an active engagement with life as it is, an openness to the present moment, a willingness to adapt to uncertainty, and a deep sense of peace with our own limitations. By embracing this philosophy, we learn to live with greater authenticity, contentment, and resilience, understanding that the key to a meaningful life is not in controlling the world around us, but in accepting it and finding joy in its inherent unpredictability. Montaigne's philosophy encourages us to embrace the reality of our inner lives, a truth that can be uncomfortable yet liberating. His view on human nature is one that is deeply rooted in understanding the complexities of the human psyche, including the shadow side, the hidden, often repressed parts of ourselves that we deny, suppress, or are unaware of. His exploration of human nature is founded on the acceptance of imperfection, and this acceptance extends to the acknowledgement of our inner darkness. Montaigne believed that understanding and integrating this darkness is essential to living an authentic and fulfilling life. Human nature, as Montaigne saw it, is not a neatly packaged, pure, or idealized entity. Instead, he believed that humans are multifaceted, contradictory, and at times deeply flawed. We carry within us a mixture of noble intentions and base impulses, wisdom and ignorance, goodness and malice. This duality is a part of what it means to be human, and for Montaigne, the key to understanding human nature was in recognizing and accepting these complexities. It is through the awareness of our own contradictions that we gain true wisdom. Trying to project an idealized version of ourselves, one that does not acknowledge our flaws, would lead to a life of denial and self-deception. To confront the darker aspects of ourselves is not to indulge in them or be consumed by them, but rather to face them with clarity and honesty. Montaigne's essays often deal with the importance of self-awareness and self-reflection in this process. For him, self-knowledge was the first step in cultivating a life of authenticity and peace. Without understanding the full range of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, both the virtuous and the ignoble, it is impossible to fully understand ourselves or others. Montaigne emphasized that human nature is not something to be perfected or transcended, but something to be acknowledged and accepted. By doing so, we free ourselves from the oppressive weight of judgment, either of ourselves or others. Montaigne's exploration of human nature also challenges us to rethink how we view our weaknesses, flaws, and mistakes. In the modern world, we are often taught to hide or suppress our vulnerabilities, to project an image of strength, success, and control. However, Montaigne advocated for embracing vulnerability and seeing it as a natural and important part of being human. For him, the flaws and weaknesses we carry are not defects, but essential components of our shared humanity. When we acknowledge and accept these imperfections, we open ourselves to deeper empathy for others. We come to understand that everyone, in their own way, struggles with their darkness, their weaknesses, and their fears. This realization fosters a sense of solidarity with others, a recognition that we are all navigating the same difficult journey of life. Montaigne was also profoundly aware of the role of fear and anxiety in shaping human behavior. Much of the turmoil people experience in life stems from their attempts to control or deny their fears. Fear, in Montaigne's view, is an inescapable aspect of human existence. It is something we all grapple with, whether it is the fear of death, the fear of failure, or the fear of judgment. Instead of attempting to avoid fear or repress it, Montaigne encouraged us to face it directly. By acknowledging our fears and embracing them, we reduce their power over us. When we confront the things that scare us, we begin to transcend them. In his essays, Montaigne often wrote about how our greatest fears are often linked to our ego, the part of ourselves that desires control, power, and security. The ego thrives on the idea of invulnerability, pushing us to create barriers between ourselves and the world around us. It creates the illusion that we can avoid suffering, death, or failure. However, Montaigne believed that true strength comes not from the avoidance of fear, but from the ability to face it and move through it. By acknowledging that we cannot escape life's uncertainties, we are better prepared to live with them. This recognition allows us to become more resilient, adaptable, and authentic in the face of life's challenges. Part of Montaigne's exploration of human nature also involved the ways in which we deceive ourselves. He saw self-deception as one of the greatest obstacles to self-knowledge. Humans, he argued, are masters of rationalizing their behaviors and thoughts, often to the point where they believe their own justifications. We lie to ourselves to protect our egos, to avoid uncomfortable truths, and to maintain a sense of control over our lives. Montaigne believed that these self-deceptions only serve to deepen our alienation from our true selves. In order to live authentically, we must be willing to confront the lies we tell ourselves, whether they are about our motivations, our desires, or our understanding of the world. By peeling back the layers of self-deception, we begin to see ourselves as we truly are, complex, contradictory, and imperfect, but also capable of growth and change. The process of confronting our inner darkness is not an easy one. It requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truths that lie within us. For Montaigne, however, this process was essential for achieving inner peace. When we stop running from our flaws and instead learn to embrace them, we come to a place of self-acceptance. This acceptance does not mean resigning ourselves to our flaws or seeing them as fixed, but rather recognizing that they are part of the human experience. It is through accepting our imperfections that we are able to grow and evolve into more authentic versions of ourselves. One of Montaigne's key contributions to the understanding of human nature is his emphasis on the importance of self-reflection. The practice of regularly turning inward and examining our thoughts, actions, and motivations is essential for personal growth. Montaigne's essays often serve as examples of this type of introspection. By sharing his own thoughts, doubts, and experiences, he invites the reader to engage in a similar process of self-examination. In doing so, he encourages us to become more aware of our own inner lives, to see the parts of ourselves that we may have overlooked or neglected. Through self-reflection, we begin to understand the patterns in our thinking and behavior. We come to recognize the ways in which our past experiences, societal influences, and unconscious biases shape the way we see ourselves and others. By becoming more aware of these influences, we gain greater control over our actions and reactions. Self-reflection allows us to develop a deeper understanding of our emotions and how they impact our decisions, helping us make more intentional and thoughtful choices. Furthermore, Montaigne's understanding of human nature invites us to embrace the paradoxes that exist within us. We are not simply good or bad, wise or foolish, capable or incapable. We are all of these things at once, and it is only by accepting this complexity that we can begin to live authentically. In his essays, Montaigne reveals the many contradictions that he himself experienced, his desire for freedom and independence, his fear of death, his tendency to be both rational and emotional. These contradictions are not seen as weaknesses, but as integral parts of the human experience. It is through acknowledging and accepting these paradoxes that we are able to integrate the different aspects of ourselves and live with greater authenticity. Montaigne's view of human nature challenges us to let go of the need for perfection and instead embrace the reality of our complexity. By accepting our contradictions and imperfections, we free ourselves from the pressure to conform to idealized standards of behavior or success. This acceptance leads to a more peaceful and fulfilled existence, one in which we are able to live in harmony with ourselves and others. Ultimately, Montaigne's exploration of human nature is a call to stop hiding from our darker aspects, to stop running from the parts of ourselves that we deem unworthy or undesirable. By confronting these aspects with honesty and compassion, we not only become more authentic, but also more empathetic toward others. This understanding of human nature invites us to cultivate a deep sense of self-awareness, to engage in continuous self-reflection, and to accept the inherent contradictions that define us as human beings. Through this process, we come to realize that it is not our perfection, but our willingness to embrace our imperfection that makes us truly human. Montaigne's approach to the concept of happiness is deeply rooted in his skepticism towards societal norms, external expectations, and the common pursuit of pleasure and material success. In his essays, he frequently challenged the conventional idea that happiness can be achieved through external accomplishments or by meeting society's predefined standards. He understood happiness not as an ultimate goal or a fixed state, but rather as a transient experience that arises when we cease striving for it directly and instead focus on living authentically. In many ways, Montaigne's idea of happiness is intimately tied to his rejection of excessive ambition and the unnecessary complexity we often introduce into our lives in the pursuit of an elusive ideal. One of the core aspects of Montaigne's philosophy on happiness is his belief in the importance of contentment with the present moment. He argued that much of human suffering arises not from our actual circumstances, but from our constant longing for something more. We are forever chasing after desires, whether for wealth, power, status, or fame, believing that they will bring us lasting fulfillment. However, Montaigne proposed that the pursuit of such desires, rather than bringing happiness, often leads to a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction. The very act of striving for something external or future-oriented takes us away from appreciating the simple joys of the present. Happiness, according to Montaigne, is not something we can chase or attain through acquisition, but something that emerges when we learn to appreciate the present, when we stop worrying about the future, and when we relinquish the need for constant validation from others. Central to Montaigne's idea of happiness is the cultivation of self-sufficiency. In an era where social expectations were heavily ingrained, he encouraged people to look inward rather than outward for happiness. He often pointed to the Stoic philosophy, which emphasized the importance of cultivating inner peace and resilience in the face of external circumstances. For Montaigne, happiness was not contingent on external validation or material success, but on the ability to remain content regardless of one's external conditions. He recognized that external factors such as wealth, status, and power are temporary, and thus relying on them for our sense of well-being is inherently unstable. Instead, he championed the importance of finding contentment in simplicity, in being satisfied with what we already have, and in recognizing that true happiness is not dependent on external circumstances, but rather on internal equilibrium. Montaigne also believed that happiness is found in the acceptance of our imperfections, flaws, and limitations. He argued that much of human suffering stems from our unrealistic expectations and our relentless drive for perfection. In our modern culture, there is a constant pressure to be perfect, to look perfect, to perform perfectly, and to always be in control. But Montaigne rejected these ideals, understanding that perfection is unattainable and that the pursuit of it often leads to anxiety, frustration, and disillusionment. he urged people to embrace their imperfections, to accept their flaws and limitations, and to recognize that these very traits are part of what make us human. Happiness, for Montaigne, is found in embracing imperfection, in letting go of the impossible goal of being flawless, and in accepting the messy, unpredictable nature of life. This acceptance of imperfection also ties into Montaigne's ideas about the inevitability of suffering and death. He did not believe in the denial of these aspects of life, nor did he subscribe to the illusion that happiness can be fully separated from pain. Instead, he believed that suffering is an inherent part of life, and that happiness can be found not in avoiding pain, but in confronting it with acceptance and grace. Montaigne's essays are filled with reflections on mortality, and he regularly pondered the inevitability of death as a central feature of human existence. By acknowledging the reality of death and suffering, Montaigne believed we could live more fully, appreciating each moment for what it is and letting go of our obsession with control. He saw death not as something to fear or avoid, but as an essential part of the human experience. In facing it honestly, we come to appreciate the brevity and preciousness of life, which in turn deepens our capacity for contentment and happiness. Another essential element of Montaigne's philosophy on happiness is his view on the importance of relationships and human connection. While he was a firm believer in the necessity of self-sufficiency, he also recognized the importance of meaningful relationships with others. For Montaigne, happiness is not found in solitude alone, but in the quality of the relationships we form with others. However, he cautioned against the superficiality and insincerity often present in social interactions. He advocated for cultivating relationships that are grounded in mutual respect, understanding, and authenticity. He believed that true companionship is found when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with others, when we share our true selves, and when we connect on a deeper level beyond mere social formalities. In his own life, Montaigne valued the friendships he had with a select group of people, and he often reflected on the significance of these relationships in bringing him joy and comfort. Montaigne also recognized that happiness is not a static or permanent state, but a series of fleeting moments that come and go. Happiness, for him, is not something that can be permanently attained, but rather an experience that arises when we align ourselves with the present and stop striving for more. This perspective offers a profound sense of freedom, as it frees us from the pressure to always be happy or to achieve a particular ideal of happiness. By embracing the transience of happiness and allowing ourselves to experience life as it comes, both the joys and the sorrows, we open ourselves to a more authentic and fulfilling life. One of the most profound lessons Montaigne offers in his exploration of happiness is the idea that it is not something we can control or force, but something that arises naturally when we stop overthinking and overanalyzing our lives. We often become so preoccupied with the idea of happiness that we lose sight of the simple pleasures that are already available to us. We are constantly in search of something bigger, better, and more exciting, when, in reality, happiness is often found in the small, everyday moments. For Montaigne, happiness is found in the warmth of a conversation with a friend, in the satisfaction of a simple meal, in the enjoyment of nature, and in the peace that comes from within when we stop striving. Moreover, Montaigne's ideas suggest that our relationship to happiness must be grounded in mindfulness and presence. By learning to be present in the moment, to embrace what is without judgment, and to accept what comes, we naturally open ourselves to happiness. This requires us to stop looking for happiness in the future or in things we don't have, and instead to find it in the here and now. Montaigne's emphasis on contentment with the present moment and his rejection of excessive striving for external validation reminds us that happiness is not something to be obtained or achieved, but something to be discovered by living fully in the moment. Through Montaigne's writings, we are reminded that happiness is a subjective, ever-changing experience that cannot be fully understood or captured by external definitions or societal standards. Rather, happiness emerges when we accept ourselves as we are, when we relinquish the need for perfection, when we embrace the realities of suffering and death, and when we foster authentic relationships with others. By letting go of our attachment to unrealistic ideals and embracing the simplicity and imperfection of life, we can cultivate a deeper sense of peace and joy. Montaigne's philosophy offers us a path toward a more authentic and sustainable form of happiness, one that is grounded not in the pursuit of something external, but in the acceptance of what is, and the embrace of life as it unfolds. Montaigne's philosophy on the human condition challenges the very core of societal expectations and norms, offering a deep insight into the nature of freedom and personal autonomy. At the heart of his thought is a profound rejection of the overbearing influence of society in shaping our lives and determining our values. He recognized that the modern world, particularly in his time, imposed artificial frameworks that limited human expression, creativity, and individual growth. Montaigne's idea of freedom, then, is not simply the absence of external constraints, but the liberation of the individual from the tyranny of these imposed norms, so that one may live in accordance with one's true self. At its core, Montaigne's concept of freedom revolves around the notion of self-sovereignty, of being the master of one's own life and decisions. Unlike the external freedoms that are often granted or restricted by political systems or social hierarchies, Montaigne believed that true freedom came from within. It is the freedom to shape our own thoughts, to live according to our own values, and to embrace the fullness of our being without undue influence from external forces. In his time, Montaigne observed that society placed heavy demands on individuals, shaping their roles and identities based on rigid norms, particularly related to honor, social standing, and obedience to authority. These expectations constrained people's freedom, pushing them to live lives that were inauthentic and disconnected from their true desires. Montaigne's rejection of societal norms is tied to his deep skepticism of authority, which he viewed as often arbitrary and detrimental to personal growth. In his essays, Montaigne repeatedly critiques the influence of the church, the state, and other powerful institutions that claimed the right to dictate how people should live and think. He believed that such institutions stifled personal autonomy and were often more concerned with preserving their own power than with the well-being of individuals. For Montaigne, freedom was found not in blind obedience to societal or institutional authority, but in the courage to question and challenge these structures, to think for oneself, and to make decisions based on one's own judgment. This perspective on freedom is deeply connected to Montaigne's understanding of human nature. He believed that humans are inherently free, but that this freedom is often obscured by societal pressures and the fear of judgment. He noted how individuals often conform to external expectations out of a desire for acceptance, approval, or security, rather than out of a true understanding of what is best for them. The result, he argued, is a life of conformity and mediocrity, where individuals are not living in alignment with their true selves, but instead are shaped by the wills and desires of others. True freedom, for Montaigne, is found when we break free from this cycle of conformity and embrace our own individuality, regardless of the pressures placed upon us. For Montaigne, the key to unlocking this inner freedom was self-reflection and self-awareness. He believed that by examining our own thoughts, emotions, and motivations, we can become more attuned to our authentic desires and values. This introspective process allows us to disentangle ourselves from the influences of society and other external forces, enabling us to live more freely and authentically. Montaigne was keenly aware that society's expectations often lead us to hide parts of ourselves that do not fit within accepted norms. For example, he understood how the pressure to conform to ideals of success, morality, or even religious beliefs could suppress aspects of one's personality, desires, or inner life. This suppression leads to inner conflict and a diminished sense of self. Through introspection, Montaigne argued, we can recognize these inner conflicts and begin to resolve them by accepting our authentic selves, rather than striving to meet external ideals. In addition to introspection, Montaigne believed that freedom is deeply tied to the acceptance of life's uncertainties and imperfections. His philosophy stresses the importance of letting go of the need for control and perfection. He often reflected on the unpredictability of life, the inevitability of failure, suffering, and death, and argued that it is precisely through embracing these uncertainties that we can experience true freedom. The desire to control every aspect of our lives, to plan for every eventuality, and to avoid discomfort at all costs, Montaigne believed, only leads to more anxiety and restriction. True freedom comes when we accept that we cannot control everything and instead learn to navigate life with resilience and flexibility. By surrendering our attachment to certainty and control, we liberate ourselves from the burden of unrealistic expectations. This notion of freedom extends beyond personal autonomy to the idea of freedom in relationships. Montaigne was skeptical of the way social norms and expectations governed human interactions, particularly in terms of how we relate to others. He questioned the traditional concept of honor, which often forced individuals to live according to a prescribed set of behaviors in order to maintain their reputation. Montaigne believed that this obsession with honor led people to behave in ways that were false and disingenuous, which ultimately hindered true human connection. He advocated for relationships that were rooted in mutual respect, honesty, and understanding, free from the constraints of social conventions. In his own life, Montaigne valued authentic relationships with a small circle of friends, and he was keenly aware of the importance of surrounding oneself with people who supported personal growth rather than societal status. For Montaigne, freedom in relationships is found when we are able to be ourselves, without fear of judgment or the need to conform to societal expectations. Montaigne's ideas on freedom also challenge the modern obsession with success, wealth, and achievement. In his time, the pursuit of status and material success was often seen as the ultimate goal, much as it is in contemporary society. Montaigne, however, cautioned against the dangers of this mindset, warning that the pursuit of external validation often leads to a life of superficiality and emptiness. He pointed out that many individuals live their lives in constant pursuit of success, only to find that when they reach their goals, they are left with a sense of dissatisfaction or a yearning for something more. This constant striving, he believed, strips us of our freedom, as we become beholden to the expectations of others and to a set of arbitrary goals that do not align with our true desires. Instead of pursuing external markers of success, Montaigne emphasized the importance of pursuing a life that is meaningful on a personal level. He encouraged individuals to cultivate a life of simplicity, focusing on what truly brings them joy, peace, and fulfillment, rather than chasing after what society dictates as valuable. For Montaigne, true freedom comes when we stop comparing ourselves to others, stop measuring our worth by external standards, and instead focus on living in a way that is aligned with our authentic selves. This requires the courage to reject conventional ideas of success and embrace a life that is rich in personal meaning, not in material accumulation or social prestige. One of the most powerful aspects of Montaigne's philosophy on freedom is his advocacy for the embrace of personal experience as a guide to wisdom. He believed that individuals should not be bound by the opinions of others or by abstract philosophical systems, but should instead trust their own experiences and judgment. Montaigne was skeptical of grand theories and universal truths that claimed to offer answers for all of humanity. In his essays, he often described how his own experiences shaped his views, and he encouraged others to do the same. He believed that each person must navigate life according to their own experiences, learning from them and adapting as they go. This emphasis on personal experience reflects Montaigne's belief in the importance of autonomy, the freedom to make decisions based on one's own observations, rather than relying on external authorities. Ultimately, Montaigne's vision of freedom is not one of escapism or rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but one of deep authenticity and personal integrity. It is the freedom to live in accordance with one's true self, to challenge societal norms that limit personal growth, and to embrace life's uncertainties with courage and openness. By rejecting the conventional paths laid out by society and embracing a more introspective, authentic way of living, Montaigne believed that we can experience true freedom. It is not freedom from external constraints alone that matters, but freedom from the internal chains we impose upon ourselves, those chains of expectation, fear, and insecurity. In living authentically, in accepting our imperfections and embracing life as it comes, we free ourselves from the shackles of societal norms and external pressures, allowing us to live a life that is truly our own. Montaigne's philosophy, at its core, is about living authentically and embracing the complexities and imperfections of life. One of the most profound aspects of this approach is the way in which Montaigne addresses the concept of death. He writes not as someone who seeks to avoid it or live in fear of it, but as someone who is deeply reconciled with its inevitability. For Montaigne, understanding death is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a means of freeing oneself from the paralyzing fear and anxiety that often accompany it. He believed that our society's constant denial of death creates a tension that stifles living fully. By contemplating death openly and accepting it as a natural part of life, we free ourselves from the need to control every aspect of our existence, and in doing so, we unlock the ability to live more freely. In his essays, Montaigne writes about how the prospect of death should not cause fear, but instead should lead to a clearer perspective on how to live meaningfully. In confronting death, we are reminded of the fleeting nature of life and the futility of accumulating wealth, status, or power in the face of mortality. In this, Montaigne highlights a key aspect of his approach to freedom. When we acknowledge that we cannot control life's most profound realities, like death, we are liberated from the need to control everything else. We no longer feel compelled to live up to societal expectations, to fulfill arbitrary goals, or to adhere to a set of standards that are ultimately irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. By accepting the inevitability of death, we become more attuned to the things that truly matter: relationships, inner peace, self-awareness, and the pursuit of wisdom. Montaigne's attitude toward death is a stark contrast to the ways in which society often views it. Most people fear death, and this fear governs much of their lives. People live with a constant undercurrent of anxiety about what lies ahead, and much of their energy is consumed by the avoidance of thoughts about their mortality. Montaigne, however, believed that this anxiety arises from our refusal to confront death directly. In his essays, he writes candidly about how the prospect of death becomes less terrifying when we acknowledge that it is an inevitable part of life, and that in many ways it is outside of our control. By coming to terms with this fact, we stop living in constant fear of it, and we are able to live with greater freedom and clarity. The act of confronting death frees us from the tyranny of avoiding it, and it allows us to engage more fully with life as it is. This perspective on death also extends to Montaigne's thoughts on how one should live in the face of mortality. He emphasizes that life is not meant to be spent in constant striving, accumulation, or achievement. Instead, life is meant to be lived authentically, without pretense or the pressure to live up to external standards. Montaigne reflects on how much of human life is spent in pursuit of things that are ultimately meaningless, things that will not accompany us beyond this life. These distractions, according to Montaigne, are what keep us from living freely and authentically. They are the very things that trap us in the cycle of anxiety and fear, always focused on what might come next, rather than on what is happening right now. The recognition of our mortality, then, acts as a catalyst for living in the present moment, focusing on what truly brings us fulfillment, rather than striving endlessly for external markers of success. In Montaigne's view, living authentically means embracing our imperfections and accepting the reality of life as it is. There is no need to live up to the often arbitrary ideals set by society or by others. Montaigne encourages us to be honest about our limitations, to accept our flaws and shortcomings without shame or guilt, and to live in a way that is true to ourselves, regardless of the judgment of others. This idea is particularly significant in the context of how society often pressures individuals to present a flawless image of themselves, to pursue a perfect life, and to avoid vulnerability at all costs. Montaigne's philosophy is a direct challenge to these pressures, suggesting that true freedom comes from acknowledging and accepting our human imperfections. By doing so, we stop running from ourselves and instead embrace our authentic nature. This, Montaigne argues, is where the true freedom lies, not in striving for perfection, but in accepting our imperfection and living fully within it. This acceptance of life's impermanence and uncertainty is also connected to Montaigne's thoughts on personal growth. He believed that we are constantly changing, evolving, and learning throughout our lives. The idea that we must have everything figured out, or that we must have a perfect, stable sense of self, is, in his view, an illusion. Montaigne encourages us to embrace the fluidity of our identity, recognizing that we are not static beings but dynamic and ever-evolving. This perspective allows us to release the pressure to have everything perfectly mapped out in advance. Instead, we can embrace the idea that growth is a lifelong process, and that true freedom comes from accepting ourselves at every stage of that journey, rather than trying to fit ourselves into a fixed mold. This acceptance of change and uncertainty also ties into Montaigne's belief in the value of experience over abstract knowledge. He famously stated that the greatest thing in the world is to know how to live. For Montaigne, this understanding comes not through theoretical knowledge or external learning, but through lived experience. He viewed knowledge as something that must be internalized and experienced in a personal way, rather than simply acquired through books or the opinions of others. This notion challenges the conventional approach to learning, which often emphasizes the accumulation of facts and the memorization of ideas. For Montaigne, true wisdom comes from the process of living authentically, reflecting on our experiences and drawing lessons from those experiences. This is a fundamental aspect of his philosophy of freedom. It is not about accumulating external knowledge or conforming to external expectations, but about living life fully, being aware of our internal thoughts and reactions, and learning from our lived experiences. Montaigne's ideas about living authentically also challenge the notion of a predetermined or fixed purpose in life. While many people strive to find or fulfill a singular life purpose, Montaigne suggests that life itself does not necessarily have a single, overarching meaning or goal. Instead, he encourages individuals to find meaning through their own experiences, relationships, and reflections. This approach to meaning is liberating, as it allows us to let go of the burden of finding a grand purpose, and to instead focus on creating meaning in our daily lives. By embracing the idea that life's meaning is subjective and personal, we free ourselves from societal pressures to conform to a specific path or to live according to rigid expectations. This, for Montaigne, is the essence of freedom, creating a life that is meaningful on our own terms, without the need to adhere to prescribed ideals or goals. Ultimately, Montaigne's views on death, imperfection, and personal growth create a framework for living freely in the present moment. His philosophy suggests that we are not meant to live in constant fear or anxiety about what comes next, nor are we meant to chase after ideals of perfection or external validation. True freedom, Montaigne argues, comes when we accept ourselves fully, embrace the impermanence of life, and live authentically according to our own values and experiences. By letting go of societal pressures, we create space for a life of greater depth, meaning, and fulfillment, one that is lived in harmony with our true selves and with the natural flow of life. Montaigne's perspective on the pursuit of wisdom is rooted in the idea that true wisdom is not something that can be easily acquired, nor is it something that can be bestowed upon us by external sources. Rather, wisdom is something that grows organically within us through self-exploration, reflection, and a willingness to engage deeply with the complexities of life. In Montaigne's philosophy, wisdom does not come from theoretical knowledge or abstract learning alone, but from the lived experience and the continuous process of understanding oneself and the world around us. This is an essential part of his approach to living authentically. It is not about reaching a fixed, unchanging state of perfection or understanding, but embracing the ongoing journey of learning and growth. One of the central tenets of Montaigne's philosophy is the idea that wisdom is intimately tied to self-awareness. To gain true wisdom, one must first come to understand oneself deeply. The thoughts, desires, emotions, and fears that shape our actions and reactions. This requires a constant process of introspection, of examining the reasons behind our choices, our habits, and our beliefs. It is not enough to simply follow the dictates of society, of tradition, or of others. One must cultivate a sense of inner awareness that allows us to discern what is truly meaningful and valuable to us. For Montaigne, this awareness comes through reflection, through the practice of questioning oneself and one's assumptions, and through the courage to confront our flaws and limitations. The search for wisdom is, in many ways, the search for a more meaningful, authentic way of living. Montaigne believed that many people spend their lives distracted by external pursuits, by the quest for wealth, status, or social approval, without ever taking the time to reflect on what truly brings fulfillment. These pursuits often distract us from the deeper, more profound aspects of life that are central to our well-being. For Montaigne, wisdom lies in recognizing the difference between what society tells us we should value and what we truly value in our own hearts. It is about living in alignment with our inner truth, even if that means going against the grain of conventional expectations. Montaigne's pursuit of wisdom is also grounded in the recognition that life is unpredictable and uncertain. Wisdom does not come from seeking absolute certainty or control over every aspect of life. Instead, it comes from embracing the unpredictability of existence and learning to navigate it with grace and humility. Montaigne frequently reflects on the ways in which human beings often try to impose rigid structures on their lives, seeking stability and certainty in an inherently uncertain world. This quest for control, Montaigne suggests, is ultimately futile and leads only to frustration and anxiety. Wisdom, by contrast, comes from accepting uncertainty, embracing change, and learning to adapt to the ebb and flow of life without resistance. This acceptance of life's unpredictability allows us to live more freely, without the constant pressure to control or predict the future. One of the most profound aspects of Montaigne's philosophy is his belief that wisdom involves a deep acceptance of human imperfection. He was acutely aware of the limitations of the human condition and did not view wisdom as something that could be attained through the mastery of a set of ideals or behaviors. Rather, wisdom is found in the recognition that we are all flawed, that we are all works in progress, and that our imperfections are not something to be ashamed of, but a natural part of who we are. In many of his essays, Montaigne reflects on his own shortcomings, his doubts, and his struggles. He was not afraid to admit that he did not have all the answers or that he was still learning. This humility, this willingness to embrace one's imperfections, is at the heart of his approach to wisdom. This humility also extends to Montaigne's understanding of the limitations of human knowledge. In a time when intellectual authority was often revered, Montaigne stood out as a thinker who was skeptical of the idea that we could ever fully comprehend the complexities of life. He frequently questioned the certainty with which others presented their ideas and beliefs, noting that human knowledge is always partial, incomplete, and fallible. This recognition of the limitations of knowledge is a key aspect of Montaigne's pursuit of wisdom. Rather than seeking absolute answers or definitive truths, Montaigne encourages us to embrace uncertainty and to remain open to new ideas, experiences, and perspectives. Wisdom, in this view, is not about possessing final answers, but about remaining humble in the face of the mysteries of life and being willing to continuously explore, learn, and grow. Montaigne also believed that wisdom involves the cultivation of virtues that are grounded in the realities of human experience. For him, wisdom was not about adhering to a rigid set of moral or ethical rules, but about developing qualities like kindness, generosity, courage, and integrity in a way that was authentic to each individual's life and circumstances. He emphasized the importance of balance and moderation, warning against the extremes of either indulgence or asceticism. He believed that living a wise life meant avoiding excess and finding the middle ground between pleasure and pain, activity and rest, work and leisure. This balance, Montaigne argued, is essential for cultivating inner peace and contentment. Furthermore, Montaigne's view of wisdom is deeply connected to the idea of living in harmony with nature. For him, wisdom is not something that is disconnected from the natural world or from the rhythms of life itself. It is about recognizing our place in the world and understanding that we are not separate from nature but an integral part of it. This connection to nature is not just about appreciating its beauty or its resources, but about aligning ourselves with its natural processes. Montaigne often reflects on how the natural world provides a model for wisdom, showing us how to live with simplicity, authenticity, and balance. By observing the natural world, we can learn how to live in accordance with the deeper principles of life, without overcomplicating or overthinking our existence. In his later years, Montaigne came to see wisdom as a form of acceptance of the things we cannot change, acceptance of our own flaws, and acceptance of the inevitable nature of life and death. This acceptance is not passive resignation, but a proactive embrace of the present moment. It is the understanding that, while we cannot control everything that happens to us, we do have the power to choose how we respond to the challenges we face. Wisdom, in this sense, is not about controlling the world around us, but about cultivating the inner strength and resilience to face whatever life throws our way with dignity and grace. At its core, Montaigne's philosophy of wisdom is about embracing life as it is, without attempting to mold it into something it is not. It is about being fully present in each moment, accepting the impermanence of life, and finding meaning and fulfillment in the midst of life's complexities and uncertainties. Wisdom, for Montaigne, is not a final destination, but a continuous journey, a journey that involves introspection, humility, openness, and an unwavering commitment to living authentically. By embracing this philosophy, we can free ourselves from the constraints of societal expectations, from the fear of death, and from the endless pursuit of perfection, and instead live lives that are rich in meaning, peace, and fulfillment.